My name is Max Chauvin. I am the municipality's Director of Housing and Homelessness for the Halifax Regional Municipality. So, home sharing, great idea. I think HRM's made some progress in those areas with its work around secondary suites and so on. There's well over 1,000 people right now sitting on our by name list, which is people who are looking for housing and looking for an option. And home sharing is one of those options that we can very quickly implement. And it benefits both the homeowner and the tenant. And whether that's a suite inside your house or a backyard suite or something over the garage, any of those home sharing options really work well. And what we certainly find right now is there are a lot of 28, 32-year-old students who have finished education, are starting to get into the work world looking for housing. And I know quite a few parents who have taken advantage of the home sharing idea to give the chance for their children, in some cases their parents, to move in, to have independence, to have their own space, but also do it in a way that's affordable and a way that in some cases helps the homeowner manage their costs as well. So I think home sharing is a win-win for everybody. I mean, the most obvious one I think that exists in some places is zoning and permission to do it. So I think that can be a bit of a challenge. The other challenge I hear from people is the process of perhaps converting a space, perhaps building a space in your backyard, can be complicated. And there are permissions and permits and inspections and all of these different things that for somebody who's not experienced in it, who hasn't navigated that before, that's challenging. So I think one of the things that we can do as a community, as a society, even in the private sector, how do we equip that person who sits down one day and goes, wow, there's a lot of people in trouble in my community. I wonder how I could help. And they look to themselves and go, well, I've got space in my basement, I've got a spare room, I've got the loft in my attic, I've got the loft above my garage, I've got that whole section of my lot that I'm not using, and has that idea that I'd like to help. And then what we really, I think, want is almost a 1-800 number that you can call and go, hey, I'd like to get into home sharing. And maybe you'd call 311 or you'd reach out to your local building association, and everybody would have this resource that they could direct you to where you've got somebody who would say, that's great. They have a checklist. Here are the things you need to look at. Here's when you need a permit. Here's who you should call. Here are options maybe you haven't considered. I think we should be able to connect them to Efficiency Nova Scotia and Clean Nova Scotia, who have programs for energy efficiency and so on. So I think there's a whole host of things that we could build that would make it really easy for the person who says, I've got space and I can help. And quite frankly, may also be in a position where if I help, not only am I doing good, but if there's some revenue that comes into me that helps me with my house and with my bills, I'm also better off. And so I think there's a lot of win-wins, but I think if you're that person who's first got the idea, I'd love to try this. And we've had some calls even recently. You probably saw on TV there was a gentleman in his 70s living in Grand Parade, and he did some interviews on the news. And some guy, nobody knew who he was, walked down, met with him, and after talking with him said, I got a spare room, do you want to move in? And the gentleman is now working on another spare room in his house to do it again. And so I think there are lots of those people who want to help. I actually get a lot of calls about that. I get people who call, and they're often frustrated because they're homeless or they're precariously housed, or there's an encampment in their community. And those conversations always turn to, how can I help? What could I do? And so I think it's important, like the homelessness issue, there is no solution. There are multiple solutions, and we need to have all of them. For example, some people might do really well in a single occupancy type environment. Some people might be better in a single standalone apartment. Some people might really struggle anything beyond sort of some kind of a supported home environment. And that isn't a good or a bad on anybody. It's just people are different and they need different things, and those needs change over time. So we need a whole bunch of options. And the same is sort of true for the person who wants to help. There's lots of things that you can do. And I think our job and the job of the sort of the not-for-profit sector is when that person shows up on our doorstep, let's pull out a chair, invite them to sit a while, and figure out what they're interested in, what calls to them in terms of the need, what resources do they have. We've got people who volunteer somewhere every week making food. That's their gift. They enjoy cooking, they've got recipes, they love the camaraderie of the kitchen, they love that putting food out to feed people. If that's what calls to you, then let's find you an opportunity to do that. If you like fixing things, you're handy and stuff like that, let's find you an opportunity to that. Some people really are interested in, is there something you can't get? I call it the unfundable. Those things somewhere where, there's a pot of money here, a pot of money there, but there's a hole. And some people, give to your local United Way and tell them, I want to fill that hole, that unfundable. And for the house sharing option, we've got those people who look around their property and go, wow, I've got space. And then how do I use that to help? And so I think every one of those people we've just sort of described who wants to help are a godsend to the community and to others. And I think don't look up or down on you depending on where you sit in that spectrum of what you have as resources, time, space to give. I just think we need for that person who thinks, maybe I have space, or quite frankly, I suspect we've got lots of people who have space and they just have no idea even what the possibilities are. And I think that's the exciting challenge in front of the home sharing movement. I think, how do you build a secondary suite? I think the resources are out there. I think the home sharing movement, we need to connect them to those. But I think this inspiration, the success stories, the things that, quite frankly, home sharing can be a life-changing experience for the person you share your home with and for you. And I think the home sharing movement, that's where the explosive growth is going to happen. There'll be growth if we can really streamline, how do I do it, get me resources so I understand. But I think the untapped potential is sitting there in people who look around and go, I don't even know what to do, I don't know where to start. And for that person, how do we appear in front of them with the question and with, that's great. Let me walk you through what it looks like, what it can be, how it can feel, how it can work. And I don't think we don't want it to be heavy, like you walk in the door and ask the question, well, suddenly we're on you. You're going to do it. No, it should be something like, hey, we want to share an idea. And if it's not right for you, that's okay. We'll actually direct you to something else if you want to help, and expect the same. I've done some work over the years with various charities, and I've often had charities say, well, how do I compete with this message or this organization's message, or they're more important than me? And my comment always is that you're not comparing apples to apples. Your job is simply to present the opportunity to have an impact on your community, to change the lives of people. The potential recipient of that message will choose what calls to them. Home sharing won't be for everybody. That's okay. But how do we make sure as many people as possible know about it and can get an honest and realistic picture of what it would be like, what they can do, what help is out there for them, so that if they're interested, there's no barrier for them entering into that space. As we talk about resources and realistic picture, there has to be one place to go if it's going to work well, almost an information hub. And you mentioned in sort of your intro of the idea, the importance of potential mediation and how to help when things get rough. That's always one of the challenges to open your home. And let's ignore home sharing for a moment, and let's go back to the beginnings of this. Billeting. We used to billet military personnel who came into the community to serve in a centralized military base. We used to billet students going to university. You have more hair than I do, so the chances are that I was around before you were in this, but that was a big thing. Billeting was everywhere. And even if we go back hundreds and hundreds of years, billeting was how we housed a lot of people. When you became an apprentice, you were usually billeted in your journeyman's home. So people sometimes think what's this newfangled home sharing thing? This has been around since like probably the year 100 and 200. Not a new thing at all. So I think government could look at some point in supporting an organization that could help promote this, because it needs a champion. It needs someone to share the success stories, to house those resources, to build those connections. And quite frankly, one of the barriers to home sharing, when you don't know the person or don't know somebody who does, is that, well, how do I make it successful? I'm not a landlord. I've never been a landlord. I don't even see myself as a landlord. How do I do those pieces? Where are those templates? And if I have questions, who do I go ask? And we know quite in the homelessness sector, we know for an awful lot of people, all they need even to be successful in a commercial space is somebody between them and their landlord when communication breaks down. And it happens. Happens to you and I in our daily life sometimes. With your spouse, with your kids, with people at work, communication falls apart. And if you don't have the resources to sort of rebuild that, to work around that, it's challenging. Whereas if in a home sharing situation, you've got the homeowner and the tenant, one of them is struggling to get their message across, it's so much easier when you can call 1-800-HOME-SHARING and go, hey, my name's Jonathan, I'm sharing a home with this guy, Max, and we just aren't communicating well, and I know he's frustrated with me, and I'm certainly frustrated with him. And they can say, great, we'll come on in, we'll talk to both of you, we'll figure it out. Suddenly, even in the difficult situation, the temperature drops, because I'm not alone. I've got help. And so I think there is this real role that a group can play on promotion, connecting people to resources, problem solving, and quite frankly, even in some of the home sharing situations, nobody expects them to be permanent. Now, some people do, some of them are for life, and that's great. But other ones, maybe it's for a couple of years. And then this organization could also help that tenant who goes, I got stable for a couple of years, I'm doing okay, I've now got a better job, I'm looking for an apartment. Well, that organization can even help with those things about how do we help you navigate what might be next for you. And I think there's also a bit of a risk that sometimes we think that everybody is going to the same place. The goal is everybody should own their own home, stand alone, all those bits and pieces. Some people, that's not where they're heading, and that's okay. Again, everybody's different. So I think I wouldn't expect this sort of a little group to do necessarily everything or to be everything to everybody, but it would be that connection point. So maybe you're living in a home share situation and you're thinking, God, I'd like to learn a trade. Like, I'm feeling good. I used to do this a lot as a kid, and wouldn't it be great to get back at that? Well, you should be able to call 1-800-HOME SHARING and them go, well, that's great. Not our piece. Here's the website, here's the name, here's the phone number. Do you want us to make an intro call for you? And that kind of piece. So not only do we help the tenant, we help the landlord who may also have that question about what do we do, how do I help? But then if either of them wants to take a next step or do something like that, there's this place they can call. The barrier is super low. It's literally a phone call or an email. And then there's somebody there, not necessarily can answer everything, should be able to answer the home sharing stuff, but connects you to all those other resources that are out there in the community. So again, you mentioned sort of a one-door approach. That's what I think this needs to be. Ultimately, we need a group of people who are interested in sort of that work, and people need to come together with, this is what we think we can do, this is what we think we can need, bit of a proposal of what that would look like, and then to go to government and start those sort of conversations about, do you see value in this? What concerns you? How could it help? I think sometimes we come at those things with, boom, this is the answer. And I think it's much better to come at those things with, we have an idea. I think it's always should be circled around a problem. We have a problem, and we think we have a solution. And I think the best ones come when a group comes together like that with suggestions and comments, a clearly defined problem, but also open to hear, what do you see? What are your experiences? And so on. And then in some ways it almost gets built together. Not that it becomes government. I think these things are best handled sort of by a standalone group that can be experts in their piece and are independent. But I think we could build something with government that would make sense and would be able to help an awful lot of people. Certainly, I think there are those situations where people are uncomfortable with bringing somebody they don't know. This could also be one of the pieces of that home sharing association. Could be almost a referral system. So, we've scouted out people who are interested in hosting, and we've talked to people who might be interested in renting, living there, being there, and can almost do a match that makes sense and so on, which could, I think, be a valuable service and would address that barrier that's there for the property owner or the homeowner. I mean, obviously homelessness is caused by a lack of housing and a lack of supported, suitable, accessible housing. Because again, people are different, they need different things. But every time, it takes a long time to build new housing. So home sharing is existing space that is right there right now, just we haven't been able to take advantage of it for whatever reason. So it's a fast solution. Certainly if we share somebody and they don't take an apartment, then it does allow that for other people. So it increases housing stock. So I think that's really, really important. And I think, I think there's lots of groups that need it. We've got seniors who need it. We have youth who need it. We have students. Right now, living in some of our encampments and tents, we have people who are working full-time. It used to be homelessness was, people with often not able to work, not working and all. Right now, we've got people whose only issue is they simply can't afford a place to live. So I think huge market, huge opportunity. Certainly from my experience, I think the public does. I think there's lots of news stories. There was one the other day about folks who are still recovering from the flood that happened a couple months ago, and they still can't get repairs done. They can't get things finished. So I think people understand that there are some challenges there. I think the Construction Association's been really clear on sort of capacity they have to build. And I think the amount we've been able to build has been pretty consistent for a long period of time. So I think people understand that that's a challenge. And I think Even buildings is complex. None of this is simple. There are issues with interest rates. I think people have felt that in their own pocket. And you can go around and see there's construction projects in the municipality that have stopped because the financing became unworkable. I think you see people in their own lives who have done things that have stopped because financing became difficult. You know, you go remortgage your house right now because your mortgage is up. That plays some significant, can mean some significant changes in how much you pay a month and cash flow. So I think people see that. I think people understand the labor shortage. There's almost no place you go right now that doesn't say we're hiring and we're looking for folks. I think part of the challenge is an awful lot of those jobs don't pay very well. And so I think that's a bit of a challenge we have as well. I think supply chain issues also play into this, the availability of lumber, the availability of other supplies. And again, we bring it right to the personal level. I don't know about you, but I've been to Superstore plenty of times in Sobeys when there's a whole section that's empty. And I asked the store manager, and it's not that they're moving shelves, it's that supply of whatever it was isn't coming in. I mean, gosh, it even happened with Tylenol. I remember going to the pharmacy and you'd see the Tylenol section bare. So I think people understand all of the pieces. I also think at some point there is a bit of a feeling of, I get all of that, but you've got to do something. There is an urgency in the state of affairs that really we just have to move forward. And so I think any plan has to include how are we going to address labor, supply chain, financing, all of those different pieces. For quite a while, there was a lot of people saying, if we simply build enough housing, we will solve the problem. And you had developers who would stand up and tell you, it costs $300,000 a door to build an apartment building. And sometimes it's $400,000. But even at $300,000, you take $300,000, you amortize that over the commercial lending rate, and you need to charge $1,450 a month. And this was a little while ago, I did the calculation, but so it may even be more than that now. But it was $1,450 a month just to pay the financing. That doesn't include any upkeep, that doesn't include any repairs, that doesn't include anything like services, nothing. $1,450 in rent simply goes to the bank. There is no way that you can offer what we consider deeply affordable, 1/3 of your income geared to income housing, when you've got to charge $1,450 just to finance it. I think certainly home sharing is one of the options that could be done really quickly, but there are others too. If you drive out past Sackville on I think it's the 102, 103, I don't know, the Trans-Canada Highway, you pass Sackville, and on your left, you can actually see them building homes out of shipping containers. So there are lots of options like that that are also ready to be rolled out. Now they need land. They need a place to go. So I think there are some options that can be done very quickly. Home sharing is absolutely one of them. And I think we need to address both the crisis right now and the long term. And I think we often get stuck in a philosophical difference between, am I tackling the fire right now in front of me? Or am I going to not worry about that and I'm going to focus on long-term solutions? 10 years from now, it's going to be better and we'll get through that. And you see that in every industry. And I think if we're going to be successful, we need to do both. We need to both think about, what am I going to do tomorrow? In HRM right now, we estimate there's 200 people sleeping outside in tents and 800 people who are couch surfing and other ways of homeless. We need to find options for them. We need to find options for some of them very quickly, because if we don't, they'll stay outside and die. So, but we also can't ignore, what's the long-term solution that will be great for people and so on. Home sharing is the right option for some people. It won't be good for everybody. And we need options that are good for everybody. So we've both got to deal with crisis, and how do we deal with that? And how do we create something long-term that will address things that we need to do so that at some point we're ahead of this curve, not stuck fighting the very front of it. I think there's barriers that we talked about before that are in front of it. I think people don't know how. I think people, I mean, if you're a professional landlord, you know all the systems, how you do it, what are the options. As you mentioned, quite often in home sharing, depending on who it is, there's no lease. Now that can be because it's family members or people you know and you're just letting it happen. There can be charters and different kinds of agreements depending on what goes on. But if you're the person sitting there going, the loft of my garage is empty, you don't even know where to start. And I believe that is the biggest barrier. People don't know how to start, and I don't think we give them the support to do it. So you mentioned, I don't want those people in here. I think that's a fear based on the worst stories of the worst, but that's what gets the press. You can have 1,000 great stories and one negative story, and the negative story is the one that's going to get repeated 1,000 times. So this is why I think it's important that there's a group that's going to champion this. And I think we need to provide resources to people. Like, I couldn't fix something in my house if I tried. I am totally thumbs, I'm not good at that. So if I want to do this, like, I got no idea about electrical, no idea about anything like that. This is probably not how it works, but I almost envision a bunch of tradespeople who have retired, who want to help, who would go to someone like me if I called up the Home Sharing Association and said, hey, I'm thinking about this. I got no idea what I got to do. And you get a volunteer who comes over and they do 3 visits a month to people who call. And they come in and go, well, this is what you could do, and look at this. Here's the checklist. Here's who you call. And there's almost that outreach piece. And I mean, ultimately, as the association grew and got resources, it could be a staff person potentially. But I think the reason it hasn't flourished is there aren't the resources behind it to make it work, which includes promotion, but also includes how do you set it up, how do you help manage people, where do I go if things are going wrong on my end? What if I have to sell my house? How do I deal with that? Like, there's all these questions that the person who goes, my loft is empty, my basement's empty, my back room, I haven't walked in it in 2 years. All of those people are going, I don't even know where to start. And I think that's the barrier. I think I look at it and go, yeah, I no. And I think as a potential person that might look at that, I think we turn them off within 5 minutes. And it's not because it's not a good idea, it's not because it won't work. It's worked since like the 1 and 200s. We have 1,800 years of proof that billeting, which is what we called it before, works. So it's not a new idea. It's just something that we're sort of repackaging a little bit. But I think it's just too much for a lot of people to think about and figure out, how do I do it? And that, I think, is why, and I think that's the barrier that we need to overcome. I think it's for the person who goes, well, maybe I could do that. Like, how many times do you consider something? I can't do that. I can't do that. And then somebody takes you through it and like, oh, I can do that. That was easy. I bet you every person who's listening to us today has something came into their brain. Maybe it was a sports spiel, maybe it was cooking, maybe it was repairs, maybe it was something with their car. I know some of the professors and teachers at the community college, and I remember they're talking to people about changing your oil. And people come and they're nervous and they're not sure. And at the end of it, they go, that was simple. I don't think home sharing is complicated. But I think it's overwhelming if you don't know what to do. I'd suggest it's exactly why you need an association. You need an association that then would A, gather those questions with examples and so on, and then invite somebody from government, make the permanent link. This is our person who understands what we're doing, we understand their world, and can address those things quickly. I think right now, without an association, you have people doing it one-offs. The language isn't the same, the requests aren't the same, and it's why I think you need an association, because then it becomes, and we get the question answered. The association builds not only a checklist, but an FAQ. Here are the 50 questions that everybody asks, and here are the answers. And then it has a home. I think sometimes we ask the same question in 30 different ways, 30 different times, and never share the answer with anybody. And you get that answer, that question answered, and then the next one comes up. Whereas I think an association that has expertise in home sharing, that we've done the research, we've got 8 models, we know how it works, then partners with community services, Housing Nova Scotia, the municipal planning department, probably some other service providers, probably perhaps your local MLA, the local MP, the local councillor. All of those folks in a room who goes, we can do this. We answer that question, smuck, it goes up on the wall. Now everybody has that answer, and it's one answer. And then we build a connection so that if you've got a question about community services, about income assistance, about some of the energy rebates that are done and so on, same person gets the questions, they understand the context, they understand all those pieces. There's no need to go back over all the background and so on. And you get an answer much faster. And it's better for every end. So I think actually the answer is an association that can build linkages and systems. Because we're talking about new things in many cases. How does this system work? And so you gather a group of people who've got the expertise with the folks that have the regulatory responsibilities and go, okay, first, this is how it works. And make sure we all understand it and we understand why. This is what fails in many of these efforts. Any system, government, not-for-profit, business, personal, works for the person who designed it, for the situation it was created for at the time it was created. Doesn't matter. Anything that's repeated that keeps on going works for a reason. So our job as this group, first off, is to sit down and figure out, how does this work? With no advocacy from anybody, not on government side or your side. It is, let's together figure out how it works. Okay, then let's talk about, how do we make it better? And I think sometimes we look at a not-for-profit association and we go, why in the heck do they do it that way? And I'll guarantee you, having done this exercise many times, you go back in their history, in days before maybe they had regular funding, or who their original donors were. There was a reason. It's like the old joke that, guy asked his wife, why do you cut the ends off the ham before cooking the ham? And it's what my mother did that. Mom, why did you cut because that's what my grandmother did. You go to the grandmother, oh, I only had a pan that was that big. So things sometimes exist just because they existed then. I have one very recently that I've just worked through with a group, and it's because they still think in terms of manual accounting ledgers. They have QuickBooks, but they've never made the transition to accounting that way. So they've got a system in there that makes no sense. And everyone gets frustrated. No, go back and figure out why, because it made sense. And then how do we make it better? And that's what I think we need to do with things like zoning, approvals, all of those things. Right now, when somebody calls up, they don't even know how the system works. And we're perhaps not even sure what they're asking. But if we can get a group, a consistent group together to have that conversation and to understand, okay, this is how the process would work, good. Can we make it better? And I think then we will get, A, to that frequently asked questions, which means people can answer the question really quickly for themselves. And B, we can then look to edit systems, upgrade them, maybe even create whole new ones that I think will take away a lot of those barriers.